There are people out there in the world that daydream so much more than regular people do. Those that they have their heads in the clouds a lot and can't seem to get out of La La Land. Dr. Sommer, Eli Sommer, PhD, coined the term maladaptive daydreaming disorder to apply to these particular people, and he gave a set of symptoms or criteria, and some of this is probably going to sound familiar. Daydreaming excessively, that's often compared to an addiction, which is not exactly correct, but I'll deal with that in a later video. The daydreaming often begins in childhood, and I'll explain why. The daydreaming itself is often detailed and elaborate compared to a movie or a novel, because there's a lot going on. Repetitive movements while daydreaming is happening. You know, like every once in a while you'll see these people with facial expressions will change, or every once in a while, yeah, or hey, or they'll utter some type of word and not necessarily mean to. Or they pace, or some type of movement that goes with it. Now these people, they understand the difference between reality and fantasy. They understand the difference between their daydreams not being real and the real world. So they're not necessarily schizophrenics or anything of that nature. But they can have difficulty getting out of bed, when awake, kind of lie there, and they just want to daydream. They can't seem to get the daydreaming to stop, so it impedes in their normal, everyday function so much, you know, like something as simple as brushing teeth. And they may have suffered child abuse. And I've been promising for a while to address this one. It is time, finally, to deal with the subject of maladaptive daydreaming disorder, excessive daydreaming, and child abuse.
Average Dude has something to say about...
Okay, I imagine that people that have been following me on this subject for a while have been waiting for this particular video discussing child abuse and maladaptive daydreaming. It's long overdue. Doesn't seem like anybody truly understands the connection, and there is a connection. Dr. Eli Sommer, PhD, he coined the term maladaptive daydreaming disorder. He was convinced that there was a connection between maladaptive daydreaming disorder, the excessive daydreamers, and child abuse. Along with his fellow professionals, he has not been able to figure it out, and it doesn't seem like anyone's truly figured it out. At least not on the maladaptive daydreaming end of things, and that's kind of sad, because let me tell you something. I was the first to discuss, and so far the only one to discuss, a maladaptive daydreamer's worst enemy being free time, spare time. If you have a ton of free time, these are the people, they're just going to waste it. They'll daydream the hours away. Pace. I was also the first, and so far really only, to discuss stress as a trigger. You usually hear books and movies, and we always put the blame on anything creative, things that are finished products of creativity. But we don't actually really focus on what spurns daydreams. It's stress. It's the most harmful of the triggers. And recently I even talked about memories being a trigger for daydreams too, and you usually don't think about those. This is something that the professionals and everybody really, if they're looking for answers and really want to know how all this works, they have to get away from the old style of thinking and have the courage to deal with daydreaming in general, and creativity and the imagination, and that means no bull. Okay, I discuss the elephant in the room situations on this show. I don't cower away from them, and I'm not the kind of person that pretends that something's not there when it is. Okay, I've even discussed my own personal childhood with abuse. You usually think of kids getting abused by their dads. No, I was beaten on a regular basis by my mother. I had one of those worthless without his women fathers who didn't do anything to contradict my mom, and she was ridiculously physically violent. She was out of control, and I didn't know if I was going to make it back then. I'm lucky. Not all kids do. You hear the news stories. I take that subject matter very seriously. So it's time to discuss the connection between the excessive daydreamers and child abuse, or abuse in general, because there is a connection. And the people who have been abused, they're going to understand this one perfectly. And I mean perfectly. All right? Okay, first off, there are those that have not gone through child abuse, that are maladaptive daydreamers. That is the one criteria that Somer had that he's convinced of. It doesn't apply to all maladaptive daydreamers. There was a kid that lived right behind our backyard, on the street behind us. And he was a couple of years younger than me. He was in La La Land up until he was in high school, and probably even afterwards. But he didn't go through child abuse. He had a very happy time at home. And there are others like him, but I'll tell you, so what is it about abuse and excessive daydreaming? Okay, something that you need to understand first of all about childhood is that young children, they have wild and vivid imaginations because they're fairly new to the world. Okay, they lack experience. The older that we are, the more that we've lived of life, we have more experience. And so we know from experience what things are and what they do. And when you're a child, you look up at everything spurs creativity. You look up at the clouds and you see, you know, the big man's face, you know, blowing the wind, or ships or whatever. Or you look at the wall and you see patterns in the wall and you see shapes. Kids do this all the time. They don't have experience. So the entire world is a maladaptive daydreaming disorder trigger. But that's how it is. Kids don't have experience. So the more experience that they have, the less abstract their daydreams are, or dreams in general. Like they might dream of being in a church, a sanctuary, and seeing dogs and cats kind of floating around, and then a cow walks by the pews and goes, "Hey, what time is it?" You know, talking to the kids like, "Oh, looks like it's 7:15. Thank you." And then wakes up. Okay, those are the kind of dreams that kids have. They don't have but when you get older, the weird imaginary, those dreams kind of go and they become more realistic and more detailed. Okay, what happens in childhood is crucial, and there's a reason that child abuse is such a strong link, okay? Safety and comfort. Let's talk about that one. I'm going to repeat that again, safety and comfort. That not all children are comfortable with unfamiliar the outside world. When they're really young, they might hide behind, you know, mom or dad's legs out in public. That's normal. Not all of them are very comfortable. Now, you know, kids like I was that was beaten and abused at home and nothing was ever done to help me, I spend as much time outside as possible. But that's just how it was. There are those that are abused where they go outside and they try to find friends and just they do everything possible to stay everywhere else except home. Not all kids are extroverted in that respect. There are those that just do not feel all that comfortable. Okay, now, remember that. Uncomfortable with the outside world. Now, when you are unsafe in your own home, I'm going to tell you something. Now keep in mind I'm in my 40s and I'm a middle-aged man and I'm talking about this and I'm doing it for those of you who want to understand this. I'm certainly not doing it because it's, like, well, you'll understand. The only recurring dream I've ever had, you know, was when I was a kid, is a nightmare. And it was about my mom. When my sister was born, I was moved up into the attic. Now I loved the room. It was big, it was wonderful. But the dream would be this, and usually you would think of nightmares as everything being dark. No, I'd be up in that attic room and everything would be as ridiculously white, bright white, like you were in heaven or something like that. And this is going to get really ironic, but you know, here I am in my room and everything's all white where everything's visible, and yet I'm terrified because I know what's coming. And eventually my mom comes running up the stairs, and she's just hitting me and beating the crap out of me, and I'm desperately trying to get the covers up and just my hands up and try to protect myself. And eventually she goes away and goes back downstairs like a complete and total maniac. That's not exactly far from the truth, is how she was when I was a kid, unfortunately. And then I would just get a big sigh of relief. And then I'd feel comfortable for just a little bit. And then I would be scared again because I knew it was coming. And it was going to come. I didn't know when, but it was going to happen again. And sure enough, come up and beat me. And rinse and repeat until I wake up, dripping with cold sweat, terrified. Not knowing whether I actually was really beaten by her. I mean, that's how I woke up at night as a kid, over and over again, okay? Now, why is a middle-aged guy like me that survived it telling you this? Okay? Think about this for a moment. If you are... Damn it. Think. Somer, and you professionals, you psychologists should have understood this. Okay, kids that do not feel safe on the outside, they're unsure of themselves in the outside world. If they're unsafe, really unsafe, at home, what do you think's going to happen? Duh! Okay, it's a safety issue, and every single child has to feel somewhere safe, a solace free from harm. And if it's not out in the world, and if it's not at home, okay, think about this. Small children are supposed to be afraid of the unknown. They're supposed to be afraid of the boogeyman hiding in the darkness in the closet or under the bed. They're not supposed to be afraid of their parents, their mothers or fathers. They're not supposed to be afraid of being at home. They're supposed to be safe at home. They're supposed to be safe in their bedrooms, in their beds. So if they're not safe in the outside world, and they're really not safe at home, I can't believe I'm the only one so far that has discussed this. They go to their imaginations. Daydreaming becomes a safe haven. It's a safety zone. It's self-preservation. It's a survival mechanism for children that have been abused, Somer. And you morons in the medical profession and the psychology profession, you idiots should have figured that out. Someone who's been abused should not have had to come up and talk about this. But that's why it happens. Okay? We may not ultimately understand yet what creates excessive daydreaming in people, but when you add childhood trauma as child abuse to the mix, it's going to happen. It's pretty much guaranteed to happen. I think I've talked about maladaptive daydreaming enough. Pardon me, I'm getting ahead of myself. But I think I need to start talking about abuse, because there's a lot that I have to say on that issue. Everybody take care. I know this was long overdue.